In the past week, I took delivery of 50 cigarette cards that were originally issued in 1914 by the W.D. and H.O. Wills Tobacco Company. The card set is titled Overseas Dominions, Canada. The cards depict Canada as she was in a more simple time, before Canada and the world would be engulfed in 31 years of two major world wars and the Great Depression, and before the rapid growth and modernization that took place in Canada from the 1950s onward. On a personal note, my dad, George Fleming, was born in 1914, and he would be with us until his death 56 years later in 1970. So join me now as we take a look at Canada as she was in 1914. Here we have a view of our nation's capital, Ottawa, from the Ottawa River, and a similar view on an old postcard from Ottawa that my granddad Watson owned. Here's a view of Canada's old House of Parliament that burned down on February the 3rd, 1916, and was replaced by the present building. The Great Divide is the geological point in the Canadian Rockies where water either flows east to the Atlantic Ocean or west to the Pacific. This is one of my favorite cards in this series, and shows the beginning of mechanization on the farm, with the use of a steam tractor. Today, a modern combine tractor in one man can do the work of a whole team of men in 1914. Here's an interesting image of Ottawa, where we see the beginnings of the Rideau Canal with the canal locks by the Ottawa River, with the Chateau Laurier Hotel right beside it. This triangular-shaped area was known as Connaught Place, named after one of Canada's Governor-Generals. It was renamed Confederation Square, and since 1939 has been the location of the National War Memorial and later the tomb of the unknown soldier. Here's another quaint picture of a lumberman's camp in 1914. I'm sure a lot of the work is now more mechanized with chainsaws rather than axes, and that they are housed in trailers rather than log cabins today. Here's a sport my Australian friends will not have seen: ice boat sailing, where a sled on skis is sailed across frozen lakes. Marletto Towers are small stone forts that were built in Canada between 1796 and 1870, first as defenses against the French and later against the United States during and after the War of Independence. I think this card is depicting Castle Mountain, which is located halfway between Banff and Lake Louise in Banff National Park. This card is referring to Canada's cod fishery in the Maritimes, which in 1914 was the major industry on the Canadian East Coast. The past 30 years have been very trying for the fishing industry on Canada's East Coast due to the collapse of the cod population due to years of overfishing. On July the 2nd, 1992, the Canadian federal government banned all cod fishing in an effort to restore the fishery. The ban, for the most part, is still in place nearly 30 years later. Looks like the poor old bearer in this card is about to have a very bad day. Kinda cool outfits the hunters are wearing though. In 1914, about the only way to get about the mountains of Alberta and BC was by horseback. Today there's lots of paved roads, and the motor vehicle is the horse of today. Here's a Canadian cliche, as we are said to love our maple syrup. In my case, this is true, as I love the taste. In 1914, the two major railways in Canada were the Canadian Pacific Railway, which is still in existence, and Canadian Northern Railways, which was nationalized into the Canadian National Railway System in 1918. Here we see another somewhat iconic symbol of Canada, the canoe. In the times before the railway, Canada's rivers were her highways and the canoe her most reliable means of transport. In this card on the Canadian farm, we see how the horse still played an important role in agriculture in 1914. In the early part of the previous century, the narrow gauge railway was the most reliable means of bringing logs out of the bush. This role has been supplanted today by the logging truck. On trips in British Columbia, I could always tell when a salmon cannery was coming up, as you could smell it long before you saw it. The appearance of Quebec's provincial parliament has not changed much since 1914. The same cannot be said about the Manitoba Legislature building in Winnipeg. Opened in July 1920, the present building is much grander, with a dome and the famous Golden Boy statue at its top. The legislature buildings in Halifax, Nova Scotia and Victoria, BC are two more buildings that have not changed a whole lot since 1914. The Ontario Legislature building is another building that has remained pretty much the same since 1914. Our intrepid hunters are making another appearance. This time they're hoping to bag themselves a moose. Here we have another steam tractor plowing a field. The time of the working horse on the farm was coming to an end in Canada in 1914. The grain elevator pictured here would be for loading grain onto ships for export, and they have not changed much in appearance since 1914. However, there was a time when every prairie town would have at least one wooden grain elevator, and quite often several. They were known as the Sentinels of the Prairie, but now they have almost all gone the way of the dodo due to progress. "1914 was a pivotal year for Canada, where what came before would begin to disappear forever. On June 28th of that year, the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated in what is now Serbia, and by August Canada had descended into the horror of World War I. This was followed by the Spanish flu pandemic and the beginning of the urbanization of the country in the 1920s, before descending once again into the Great Depression and World War II. After the war, change accelerated until Canada became the modern urban nation it is today. I hope you enjoyed this look at Canada in 1914. If so, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Till next time, keep safe and well.